youngest victim that I've seen has been days old.
CSAM, or child sexual abuse material, is one of the things that my team investigates.
It's any image or video that depicts a child either nude or engaging in a sexual act with an adult or another minor.
Newborns not able to talk, not able to report the abuse. Diapers are often seen in the videos that we are exposed to.
So you have everyone around the internet, children around the internet, and then the people who prey on children are on the internet. Years ago, you lock the door to keep the kids safe. And now everyone has, a 3-inch by 4-inch screen in their hand or in their pocket. And that's now the door to access that child.
So we have more children using electronic storage devices. And unfortunately for our children, we have individuals that are preying on them and actually trying to sexually exploit them.
It is really overwhelming just to do one search warrant. And if you think about the thousands of cyber tips that come into not just our agency, but statewide, I think that we are definitely behind the 8 ball as far as being able to thoroughly investigate our cases.
Our rescue offers forensics training for investigators to help them do their job better.
Our rescue also is offering opportunities for us on software as well as hardware. Technology changes so rapidly, and my agency, like most agencies, we just don't have the funding for it. And so our partnership with our rescue.
Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to crank through some of the CSAM business, child sex abuse materials. But before I get started, I was reading along here about all these materials and, how this stuff gets going. And I read this quote. It said, according to Europol, Interpol, and NCMEC. And I thought, well, who is NCMEC? Well, these things all have a cause and effect. So let's talk first about NCMEC, because I believe that these organizations were set up so that the child abduction and abuse would continue on its merry way with no interference, because they have the laws behind them, right? So NCMEC, well, that was created by John Walsh. Remember, America's Most Wanted in everybody's TV rooms? Yeah, John Walsh was the primary driving force. Parents and advocates, John and Reevy Walsh. And it was legislated under the U.S. Congress via the Missing Children's Assistance Act of 1984, backed by President Ronald Reagan, who publicly championed the cause. So, what's this all about? Well, in the last show, I talked about a tip line going on in the UK. And so I went looking to see about other tip lines for children that would coordinate with all of this CSAM business. Well, come to find out, this group, the NCMEC, runs a group called the Cyber Tip Line since 1998. And it started with the 1981 abduction and murder of six-year-old, right? See that? Pay attention to that number. 6-year-old Adam Walsh in Florida. It drew national attention to the lack of coordinated systems for finding abducted children. So John Walsh, the dad, the son's name was Adam John Walsh, born November 14, 1974, murdered allegedly, and pay attention to these dates, July 27, they like that 27, 1981, was an American child who was abducted from a Sears department store at the Hollywood Mall in Hollywood, Florida, on July 27th. Here we got July 27th, right? The day he died, 1981. His severed head was found 2 weeks later in a drainage canal alongside Highway 60. So, Welsh's death garnered national interest and was made into the 1983 television film Adam. seen by 38 million people in its original airing. Adam Walsh, no, Adam's father, I gotta keep these Walshes straight. They're an Irish family, by the way. John Walsh became an advocate for victims of violent crime and is the host of the television program America's Most Wanted. He's also hosted the show called The Hunt with John Walsh and Pursuit with John Walsh. But he's been involved in a lot of different shows and stuff. So the NCMEC is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's a nonprofit organization created by Congress in 1980s to serve as the nation's clearinghouse for missing child cases and child exploitation reports. But there was another one, the one before that, this NCMEC, that became a reporting line in general for missing child cases, okay? But what first got started was in the UK, a group called Childline, all one word, Childline, in 1986. It was the first large-scale national helpline for children themselves to call in, and that really set the children up to call in. And it ended up, the children became entrapped by it, and so Childline was the first one in the history that I could find that was specifically for children to call in on their own. And I have more about that here in a minute. But anyway, so Adam Walsh, abducted from a Sears department store in Hollywood Mall, Florida. Adam was shopping with his mother. She left him briefly near a display of toys. When she returned, he was gone. Witnesses later reported that a store security guard had asked several boys, possibly including Adam, to leave the store for misbehaving. Adam vanished shortly after. So yeah, and then of course they found him in his head, just his head. Now what kind of parent's nightmare is this, right? Not only is this little kid Adam abducted from some mall in Florida, right? But his head ends up in a drainage canal in Vero Beach, Florida, about 100 miles north of Hollywood. And only Adam's severed head was recovered. The rest of his body was never found. The case, of course, I'm sure that missing head had a lot to do with it, right? The case drew enormous public attention, but initially had few solid leads. Over the years, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so yeah, 1984, that sparked the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and its 24-hour national tip line. And then in 1984, also the passage of the Missing Children's Assistance Act. And then in 1988, launching the TV program America's Most Wanted, hosted by Adam's father, John Walsh, which helped capture hundreds of fugitives. Well, according to them, right? 2006, there was the passage of the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, strengthening sex offender registration and tracking. So where are the weaknesses in this? Let's just get to the point here, right? There's a lot of weaknesses. Let me scroll down and just give you the best one. So I don't see it really worked according to plan, okay? And what they're saying is this. Partial compliance and state-level variance remain large. Many states are only substantially complying rather than fully. Effect on sexual abuse rates remains ambiguous and contested. It's not clear that AWA, which is America's Most Wanted, has significantly reduced sexual offending beyond prior laws. Some of the unintended negative consequences, stress on the registrants, over-inclusion, legal challenges, and active problems in debates and court cases. Yeah, so the thing did not really stand up to what they claim it would, right? But if you ask them today, they'd say, oh, marvelous, marvelous success. That poor little kid, Adam, had his head chopped off, left in an alleyway with trauma that poor family went through. So they say that, so while parts of the AWA are functioning as intended, its full promise, especially in terms of measurable public safety gains and fairness, has not been completely realized. and many question whether it's the most efficient or the just way forward. Some critics accuse Walsh of creating predator panic through his work. Critics have stated that the Adam Walsh Child Resources Center, which started without funding in 1981, generated $1.5 million annually following his testimony before the Congress. And, certainly I could look up the dates of this thing and figure that they probably have been raking in money hand over fist ever since then, right? But remember, a lot of this money gets buried in different places. So yeah, you could spend the next few hours and figure out, well, how much have they taken in for this thing? Well, some things are more important than other things, right? The main thing is Adam's case brought national attention to the vulnerability of children to abduction. It transformed U.S. law enforcement practices, public awareness, and led to life-saving resources like the NCMEC hotline. So, and here is a quote from John Walsh. He said, "Before the murder, I was so happy. We were building our dream project, a $26 million hotel. I lost everything. I couldn't work. Our house went into foreclosure." And this was in People magazine in 1997, explaining the aftermath of his son's 1981 murder. People don't understand the devastation the murder of a child does to someone. 80% of parents of murdered children wind up in divorce. The only thing you have in common is that horrible sadness. You can't see the joy of your previous life. Reeve and I fought to stay together. Well, aren't they the little heroes, right? Another one. Who could take a 6-year-old child and murder and decapitate them? Who? We needed to know. We needed to know. And today we know. The not knowing has been a torture, I'm telling you, but that journey's over, said by an emotional John Walsh, said in December the 16th, 2008 news conference regarding the solved 27-year-old case of his son, Adam Walsh. 27, that means 9. So they say, bottom line, the registry system, as shaped by the Adam Walsh Act, has not clearly achieved its main goal, reducing sexual reoffending. Gee, I wonder why that's happening. Experts agree it could be more targeted and evidence-based, and we still don't know for sure if some of its features help our public safety. And I have a couple of links down below if you care to go a little bit further, but John Walsh's daughter, Megan, she had her children removed by him and his lovely wife, Reeve, and she claims that his father set up the cops and the CPS in their local town because of his money and power and had her children removed, and her own children are now living with her parents who engineered having them removed. Well, I tend to believe she's telling the truth. She's trying her best to get out there and get exposure. I found a couple of interviews she's done on, lower base. I'm sure nobody big is going to touch her, the poor woman. So anyway, yeah, I think she's telling the truth. And I also ran across another case, that Rock Nation. It's really big during the P. Diddy trial and all those thugs that run that group. Well, that CEO is a woman, and she was stalking her own daughter. I saw the case on the one person on YouTube who does a pretty good job of investigating things. I put that link down below. So yeah, they do go after their own children. So I think his daughter is telling the truth, that her parents are shaky people and they set her up and stole her children. I don't find a stretch with any of that. Now, you may find it differently, and that's perfectly fine. We all can share different opinions and still have a conversation together. So anyway, so it basically all got started. First of all, the NCMEC was first. Then and that was in 1984, and then the child line by that dreadful woman in the UK was 1986. I heard from that woman's office. It was Esther Raskiner, and when I did that show, I was so infuriated, and this was years ago. I was infuriated. I had nicknamed her Rat Face in that show, okay? And some people said, well, you're not very professional. Hey, get off my tail, okay? I will call psychopaths what I want to call them. So anyway, I had nicknamed her Rat Face, okay? And I can remember today, I feel as riled up today as I did back then. And very few people have gotten me this riled up, okay? I wouldn't be able to function if I let them all get me riled up. But anyway, so this child line thing was so horrible. Getting children being abused to call in, and then they would go and round up the kids and let the abusers continue. So let's get to this let's get to the CSAM show stuff right now. So there's different ways that people know who is hosting this content, right? This child sexual abuse materials. And nonprofits have put together some lists and it makes sense because where I made the big turn was this. I realized that the hosting and the technical origin, meaning the servers and the uploads, they're traced to the United States, Germany, Netherlands, and Canada. Interesting group, right? Now that we know a little bit more about Germany. So anyway, and Germany also, like the Netherlands, made prostitution legal. Kind of a hot mess there, but anyway, so so they can tell where the servers are located, and of course they wouldn't be located in Africa or someplace without reliable internet, right? So the servers where this stuff is located. Now that is going to be different from where they get the information from, right? Because the production of these things takes places in different places. But just the servers go out there, okay? So then we have these regions that have been identified where all of these child trafficking victims are coming from. And these are the high-risk regions for victimizations. Eastern Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, Ukraine, and Southeast Asia, Philippines, Thailand, and the Philippines is just out of control with those Catholics there. Anyway, so parts of Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana in sextortion schemes. And also Western countries. Many victims live in the same countries where the content is uploaded. So now we know that the things that are being broadcast out of the the United States, Germany, Netherlands, and Canada, they're the ones hosting actual dirt, right? We'll just call it the dirt, the porn, or whatever it is. They're the ones hosting it on their computer servers in those regions, right? Now, obviously, there's a dark web and all that, but let's just focus on what we can realistically get our hands around today. So they know where all this horrible stuff is being broadcast out of. They know where it's coming from, which is Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, parts of Africa, okay? So, according to Europol, the majority of detected CSAM is hosted on legitimate platforms in high-income countries, while many victims are located in regions with higher child poverty and less protection. Well, of course, and then they have those NATO bases. Good morning, Brussels. So the IP tracing can point to where a file was uploaded or where the server is, but it does not always mean that is where the abuse occurred or where the offender lives. The online nature of the crime makes it truly transnational. So, and there's quite a few different ongoing groups that are running out of Romania right now. These are groups that I personally would not trust for a second, but of course you're going to have to decide for yourself. So some of these groups doing a great deal of ongoing work inside Romania. Okay, that would be our target area, right? Because that in my mind is where this stuff is all happening. They've even admitted that's where it's happening, right? So there they have NGOs such as E-Liberare, Save the Children Romania, and other Roma community organizations. And they have international partners. Pay attention to these. UNICEF, IOM, that Greta stuff I was talking about in the last show, and USA, and Europol supporting police units, and all engaged in child protection, anti-trafficking, and victim support. I would argue they're all engaged in keeping it running, but that's just my opinion, right? So let's talk about this infuriating group called Childline, and I'll hope to keep my blood pressure down. That was launched in 1986. The founder, TV presenter, and child protection advocate, Esther Rantzen, or Ratface. Her real name is spelled Rantzen, Rantzen, so I just called her Ratface, together with the charity National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. She was a TV person in the UK, this Esther Ratface, and she started this charity. The purpose was a confidential, free telephone helpline for children and young people to talk about abuse, neglect, or any problems that they couldn't tell the adults around them. The original number, 0800 1111, simple and easy for children to remember. The number was heavily promoted on TV, in schools, on posters, and in children's magazines, so kids knew where to turn. Yeah, right into a friggin' trap. It was pioneering at the time because it let children speak to trained counselors anonymously. Now, keep in mind, a lot of people volunteered at these things, so it wasn't like it was all run by demons, right? So a lot of good people volunteered at Childline for many, many years and would have had no idea that it had some secretive hidden thing, right? Because Childline still operates now under the NSPCC umbrella. It offers a free 24/7 phone line, web chat, and online resources for mental health, bullying, sexual abuse, exploitation, etc. When Childline launched in 1986, it was overwhelmed. In the first year, more than 50,000 calls were attempted, far more than the volunteers could answer. This led to long wait lines and frustration for children in crisis. It heavily relied on volunteers and charitable donations, making it hard to keep up with demand, especially during media campaigns that boosted awareness. A significant fraction of calls were from children testing the service or playing pranks. This sometimes tied up lines for children who truly needed help. Yeah, I doubt that really happened as much as they say. There is always somewhere in these little things they come up with that blame the victims, right? So they claim that Childline is primarily a listening and counseling service. In the early years, critics said it sometimes didn't coordinate enough with social services or the police to protect children at immediate risk. So, the services promised confidentiality unless a child is in danger or serious harm. So, in 2006, Childline formally merged with the NSPCC, giving it better funding and a professional structure. Yeah. Childline was pioneering in giving abused and neglected children a voice and a lifeline. It also caused secondary abuse, in my opinion, because these kids became hopeful. They flooded those phone lines, right? Their calls couldn't get answered. Then the cops would show up. So it was just a trick against children. Only a psychopath would trick a child like this, because they're cowards, right? Yeah, trick those kids so you can protect your abusers, right? Because if too many kids start calling in about a certain abuser, then they know they got a problem, right? So over the years, it has evolved into a more structured part of the UK's child protection landscape. And Dame Esther Louise Ratface, born 22 June 1940, is an English journalist and television presenter who presented the BBC television series That's Life for 21 years, from 1973 until 1994. She worked with various charitable causes and founded the charity's Childline, a helpline for children, which she set up in 1986, and the Silver Line, designed to combat loneliness in older people's lives, set up in November 2012. And Ratskin, or Ratface, she was awarded an OBE for services to broadcasting in 1991. And a CBE for services to children in 2006. Yeah, she got quite a lot of awards, right? And she's a patron number, and she also, I'm not gonna laugh and stuff and make fun of it, but because I don't want to evolve into being like one of them. But Dame Esther Ratskin, or Ratface, she evidently campaigned to make physician-assisted suicide legal in the UK. And the 83-year-old broadcaster revealed last year she had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she had been campaigning to make physical-assisted suicide legal in the UK. And she went over to Switzerland, and bye-bye Ratface. So anyway, so let's talk about some of these cases that have involved children in homes and places, right? Here's how I picture it possibly in Romania. Probably lots of old buildings around, right? During the communist era, they probably left like factory buildings and stuff, right? How hard would it be, and these places would be in a remote area, right? How hard would it be to take one of these old factory buildings and just slap up a little bit of paint, build it out so that you have all these small little bedroom studios. We're just calling them bedroom studios. You can set them up. You're not cared about the lighting. You're not really cared about the noise and stuff, right? You don't want to make it too annoying, but you don't want to invest in the best equipment, right? Because you're just trying to make as much money as you can off of these kids. And because they're kids, people aren't going to be complaining about the noise and, oh, that room doesn't look very tidy, and, oh, why doesn't that kid have better lighting? So yeah, so you got a lot of advantages, and they have a distinct past. And I found a few cases. There was a Spain-Romania network. There was houses searched in both countries in 2021. Romanian police and Spain's Policia Nacional with Europol dismantled a ring using the Loverboy method, and they included 16 house searches, 12 in Romania, 4 in Spain, identified 25 victims, and they said this is a classic apartments and transport to Western EU model. Then there were some people, and so remember, that was 2021, okay? 16 searches and 25. It seems pretty low to me. I mean, I'm not trying to get glib here, but it just seems a little bit low to me. And I found another one in 2024. France-Romania network coordinated arrests and victim support. Eurojust or Europol backing this operation targeted at trafficking Romanian women to France for sexual exploitation. 8 suspects were identified and victims interviewed. These cases typically rely on private flats and short-term rental. And then there was a case in Ireland with a Romanian network, 38 searches in 2023. As you can see my point here, I wouldn't say that they're not rounding anybody up, but I would say that, and remember, I am only guessing here, right? I would imagine that they are rounding up their competition, right? Or people that have gotten in their way, they're irritated by. That would be, like, for example, I've read this time and time again. Let's say you move to a town in this country. They're all controlled, right? It's been controlled since the beginning. We had that preacher, we had the sheriff, and we had the doctor, right? All 3 people that people confided in, right? So they've always had their noses directly inside of our business. So it isn't a stretch that this all would be happening, and that they would. So let's say that you go in one of these towns and you think you and your buddies are going to set up a business selling heroin in that town. Well, you're likely going to be taken down, and the reason is because the group running that town in this USA will be the ones who will take you down. They will use their friends in law enforcement because they're all part of the same group, right? So that's how I see some of these cases, either somebody that irritated them or somebody that was in competition with these people, right? So yeah, and I have them. And then of course the most famous one is the Andrew Tate, 2002 to 2025. He was running the alleged Loverboy coercion into content. So Romanian prosecutors alleged coercion using the Loverboy tactic and making victims create online sexual content. So what's so different about this than children making online sexual content, I ask? So courts have seen parts of the case back for pursuit. Anyway, so he's still running around somewhere. I looked into it a little bit, but somehow he was under house arrest for a while, and then that creepy daughter of Jordan Peterson's daughter went there to get ideas. Yeah, they're all connected somehow in some sort of sleazy way. But yeah, so I couldn't get a real handle. His case is still open right now, and it doesn't matter that much. The guy's a psycho, right? So, but that is how it worked, right? Women were located in these places, sleeping in these places, and managing these cams in these places, right? So, there's just a lot of weaknesses in these things, right? And I believe the weaknesses are on purpose. And I have all of the different groups and more information down below. So how exactly are they getting away with this? Because I mentioned before, this child in the bedroom business, I think it's a two-tier thing. I think that they're actively recruiting kids on social media, places like Facebook, all those places, and they would likely have a gang running buildings over in Romania that are housing all of the activity, right? So, and then they have those planes for the activity of the children being sent out to perform sexual things. They would be sent out on U.S. planes and NATO planes, right? So how did they get away with this in the first place? Well, it was because of a Silicon Valley trick. 100%. What did they do? Well, it was very, very simple. All they had to do was set up end-to-end encryption, okay? And end-to-end encryption was designed, and listen carefully, to make digital communication as private as a face-to-face conversation. So if you're interested in how this got going, which I obviously am, well, here's why it got going. The primary motivation, and this is to give end-to-end encryption on Facebook and all of these places. Now, they couldn't just narrow it down to one place they could talk privately, but no. They opened it up to all of these platforms. And the primary motivation was to protect journalists working in repressive countries, human rights defenders and political dissidents, whistleblowers, lawyers, or at-risk individuals. It was not created to help criminals, according to them. It was created as a reaction to government and other third-party surveillance. So, yeah, so that journalists and these lawyers and stuff can hang around and talk privately on these platforms. They gave end-to-end encryption for everybody. Everybody got it, right? And that is how it works, because getting these kids in your house to do sex, it all becomes encrypted, right? So, let's look at what they call are the unintended exploitations. Because end-to-end encryption prevents the service provider itself from scanning message content, the same protection that shields legitimate users also shields abusers. Isn't that just amazing? It is just fascinating that the same protection shields abusers. I'm just stunned. Offenders who trade CSAM or groom children exploit end-to-end messaging apps. What are they? Well, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram secret chats, and they have disappearing messages. This makes proactive detection by platforms much harder, I would argue on purpose. So law enforcement typically can intervene only when a victim or other user reports the abuse themselves, or through lawful access to devices or metadata. Why it's a policy dilemma. Privacy versus safety. Weakening or banning the encryption would harm legitimate users, including journalists and abuse survivors who rely on it for protection. I say get rid of it all. Everybody out, 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 out. They say that child protection advocates argue that society needs some way to detect and block CSAM even in encrypted channels. I got a solution. Get rid of it all. Technology and privacy advocates warn that any built-in backdoor could be misused by repressive regimes or criminals. Yes, another reason, get rid of it all. So, governments, researchers, and industry are trying to find middle ground. Here's always the thing. they come in with a middle ground. Oh, we're trying to fix the problem. We didn't know that encryption was going to cause such a problem. How did we have figured this out? We're just trying to make it safe for the journalists and them. They need to talk privately. They have to have this end-to-end encryption just for them because they're so important. Don't protect those children. Protect those frigging journalists. So anyways, no single solution has been agreed upon that both fully preserves end-to-end encryption and allows automatic detection of child sexual abuse materials. So their core purpose was and is to protect legitimate users' privacy and safety. To hell with the children. Its unintended consequence is that it also makes it harder to detect and stop online child exploitation. Isn't that just amazing, right? So, a meta-analysis published, now I don't believe any of these reports, but I'll go ahead and humor myself and read them. Published in early 2025 estimates that 1 in 12 children globally, or 8%, have experienced online child sexual exploitation or abuse, which includes grooming, sextortion, and exposure. In the Disrupting Harm report, some countries show up to 20% of children subjected to child sexual exploitation and abuse online in the past year. Yeah, 20%. Hotlines and monitor organizations report that self-generated child sexual abuse material currently is consistently high, and many of the removed images and videos are believed to have been produced by the minors themselves. See, what they're playing right now is, well, we don't really know. This has only been going on for a few years, but heavily in the last 3 years. So we're just trying to get a handle on this stuff is how it's working right now, right? The IWF and NHOPE data and EU reports show that a growing share of CSAM being reported as new material, not archival, which is presumed to come from coerced, self-produced content by children. So, underreporting, many victims never report. Yeah, they sure don't. It's hard to distinguish between content produced in studios by third parties or by coerced minors since it's already circulating. I think we should also stop calling them minors. Minor deflects from the fact they are children. It's just a tricky word. Researchers and agencies often cannot publicize raw data that would risk exposing victims. The shift to encrypted messaging, ephemeral content, and AI-generated content complicates detection and measurement. Yeah, it's always too complicated to deal with, isn't it, right? Given the trends and the growth in self-generated CSAM reports, it is reasonable to infer that tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of children are victims of coerced self-filming globally each year. But that is just an estimate. So, where does this term coerced children come from? Child safety organizations such as the NCMEC, IWF, Europol, and Interpol use the phrase self-generated but coerced. In most of these cases, the child is not voluntarily creating sexual material. Instead, the child is groomed, manipulated, or threatened by an offender, often an adult, to produce images or videos on their own phones or laptops. Or, in the case of Romania, the phones and laptops they are assigned to in the building they're working out of, right? This pattern has been observed repeatedly in investigations and victim interviews since the mid-2010s. So, Europol reports since 2018 describe the groom, coerce, record sharing cycle as central to modern online child sexual exploitation. The NCMEC cyber tip line has seen sharp rises in online enticement and sextortion cases in which offenders first gain the child's trust and then pressure or threaten them to produce more images or engage in live videos. These include grooming, building trust, posing as a peer or potential friend and partner. Sextortion means threatening to leak an initial image of the child if the child does not comply with further demands. They get manipulated, promises of money, gifts, or affection. In some cases, blackmail with hacked or stolen private photos. So this is what they claim. They say, unfortunately, there's no single outward physical sign that would reliably indicate a child is being coerced online. Child protection professionals advise adults to watch for behavioral and situation changes. Sudden secrecy. I don't know why these kids had to be secret about stuff. Parents are basically using those devices as babysitters, right? Yeah, so even when these kids are going through these changes in sleep or appetite, if you're so disconnected from your own child that they're 24/7 in their bedroom doing, you don't have a clue what they're doing in there, you already got a problem to start with, right? So first, identify what the problem is. The kids are being left alone in their frigging bedrooms, okay? So what they say is this. Why investigators know this. The understanding that many images are made under coercion comes from rescued victim statements, undercover investigations into grooming networks, analysis of chat logs seized from offenders that show the grooming and threats, hash matching of new material that shows the same victims being re-exploited over time. So, coerced children refers to a documented pattern. Most so-called self-generated CSAM is actually the result of online grooming, manipulation, and sextortion. Victims often do not bear obvious physical marks. The abuse is primarily psychological and emotion. Awareness of behavior patterns is key to early protection. So you can look through the U.S. State Department. They have these things called TIPS, Trafficking in Person Reports. And they describe Romania is described as a primary source country for sex trafficking in Europe, exporting victims to countries like Germany, Italy, Spain, and the UK. And that report came out of the U.S. Department of State. Keep in mind, remember that Lila woman from Pornhub? she came out of a Department of State school. So, yeah, they're all dirty, okay? All of them are dirty. So, the Global Organized Crime Index profile for Romania states that it is a major origin and destination for human trafficking, and that the country remains among the top 5 in the EU for the number of victims concerned. And according to all of these reports, I've also left the links right next to them so you can go look for yourself. So, Romanian authorities' own data shows that sexual exploitation dominates among trafficking victims in many years. Reports show that domestic trafficking, including sexual exploitation, remains a major problem. Research also highlights Romania's role as a primary source for both sex and labor trafficking across Europe. Pretty big deal coming out of Romania, if you ask me. So, Romania acts as a source, transit, and destination country for sex trafficking. Ding, ding, ding. And how are they doing that? Well, thanks to NATO, right? So, so Romania acts as a source for child trafficking. It is a transit for child exploitation and a destination for sex trafficking. Something else, right? So right there in Little Romania. So what happened before the internet? Well, in the 70s and the 80s, child abuse images were produced and traded mostly in Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Production was small scale, done by individual offenders or small local groups. There was no single hub. The material was circulated by mail, not concentrated in Eastern Europe. So that was the 70s to the 80s. About the time they came up with all those horrible Romanian orphanage stories, right? Then there was a post-Soviet shift in the 1990s. The association, perk up your ears here, of Eastern Europe with early online CSAM production comes from a particular period after the collapse of the USSR. Economic vulnerability, the early 1990s brought widespread poverty, weak enforcement, and corruption in parts of the former Soviet bloc. Also in the 1990s, technology became cheap. PCs, early digital cameras, and dial-up internet became accessible around 1994 to 1996. Many post-Soviet countries did not yet have strong child protection or cybercrime laws. Small organized groups in countries such as Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, the Baltic states, Romania, and parts of the Balkans began producing photo sets and short videos for sale to Western buyers. Because of currency differences, even small Western payments were highly profitable. So there were several operations. There was the Operation Wonderland Club. I covered that years ago. That was in 1998. Operation Icebreaker 2004. Operation Rescue 2011. Those exposed many of these Eastern European studio-based networks and dismantled them. Yeah, time to move on to a new business, right? So technically, the CSAM business did not originate in Eastern Europe. Child abuse imagery existed decades earlier in other parts of the world. What changed in the 1990s was the emergence of organized online commercial production in some post-Soviet countries, driven by local economic collapse and early internet opportunities. Silicon Valley strikes again. Those organized studio networks were largely shut down by coordinated international operations by the mid-2000s. Yeah, they were pretty expensive to operate too, right? And also those big operations would have more things to leak out of them, right? So why not just put it into one big building, right? So if you're going to confine your things, you don't, if they were getting in trouble operating the way they were in these studios, they had these studios set up in all these Eastern countries, right? Well, a full-blown studio operation is pretty big, right? So then you can take the opportunity to rebuild a building with little bedroom settings for studios. You got a building out in the middle of nowhere. You're not going to have the same people nosing around that you would have in a big studio production. People can then edit and do their own studio production. You don't have to bring in all these extra people. See, they keep saving more and more and more money, right? And the way they get more money, in my book, is they isolate these kids into a building. So, but since the mid-2010s, so it's not coming from the studios. Now they're saying they don't know where the stuff is coming from. They said the majority of new material is self-generated. Victims worldwide, often in wealthier as well as poorer countries, are groomed or coerced online to record themselves, usually at home. The hosting servers for the CSAM today are often in countries with cheap hosting infrastructure, like the US, Netherlands, and Russia, which is different from where the abuse is produced. So the bottom line is this: Eastern Europe was an early center for organized commercial online child sex abuse material production in the 1990s to the 2000s. So, yeah, there's always this ebb and the flow, isn't there? Let me see. The creation, distribution, possession, and even attempted exchange of CSAM are illegal under U.S. federal law and the laws of most countries. But yeah, there's some CSAM, or these images, is not simply an illicit message. It is a record of a real child being abused. And this is what they say. Combating CSAM is treated worldwide as a top priority child protection issue. Yeah, I bet it is. Law enforcement agencies and organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the one I started with John Walsh, they work closely with technology platforms. Yeah, right back with their old friends, right? To detect, report, and remove CSAM and to identify and rescue victims. For decades, people imagined child abuse imagery as the work of shadowy studios hidden in remote corners of the world. But the internet quietly changed everything. When personal computers, webcams, and social media apps became part of everyday life, predators no longer needed a camera crew or a rented apartment. They could reach children directly in their own bedrooms through a chat window or a game. That shift, invisible to much of the public, transformed the nature of the crime. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, investigators in Europe and North America were still raiding physical locations, apartments or basement studios, where organized groups produced and sold illegal images. Those operations were broken up by large police departments, but new technology opened up a far more diffuser threat. By the mid-2000s, broadband and smartphones meant every child with a connected device could be targeted. Did you hear that? Broadband and smartphones meant that every child in the world with a connected device could now be targeted. Predators learned they could persuade or pressure a child to create explicit images or appear on a webcam. The result was a flood of material created in private homes rather than in professional studios. Today, according to Europol, Interpol, and the U.S. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, most new child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, is self-generated by minors under pressure or blackmail. The images and videos usually originate on the victim's own phone or computer. So why does this change matters, right? So it means there is no longer a single region to target or a handful of ringleaders to arrest. The crime now follows the same digital pathways that connect families, schools, and friends. It also means that protecting children requires not only police operations, but also education, early detection, and cooperation from technology platforms, which you're never going to get. From the early studio era of the 1990s and 2000s through the rise of online grooming in the mid-2000s to the current reality of kids in bedrooms producing images under coercion, it highlights the law enforcement response, the role of social media and adult content platforms, and the ongoing challenges in a borderless digital environment. The kids in bedrooms pattern is global, not tied to one country, or so they say. The absence of a public list is not because agencies don't know, but because of privacy, safety, and the need for quiet investigation. So they're just keeping the information to themselves, right? So anyway, so yeah, it started with cheap internet stuff, weak laws and poor cross-border enforcement in parts of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet bloc, availability of inexpensive cameras and dial-up web distribution. So yeah, pretty sad world. And the shift from the 2000, yeah, I already went over all that. Okay, so yeah, according to Europol and all of them, 2022, 2023, the year we're in right now is 2025. Large studio-type production networks still exist in a few places, notably for live-streamed abuse for payment, sometimes in Southeast Asia or parts of Eastern Europe. But they are the minority of global volume. Now remember, they're coming up with this stuff, but they say they don't really know, right? So I don't think that anybody is getting any kind of pressure if you ask me. Give me a second to put this on hold and scroll down here for a second. Yeah, they claim the Internet Watch Foundation, or IWF, reported that in recent years, over 90% of the CSAM web pages removed involved self-generated content. Yeah, I think it's coming from both directions. Kids getting trapped by predators online using that end-to-end encryption. That's exactly why they came up with it. I can't think of, oh yeah, we got to make sure the whole world is hampered so just a couple journalists can be safe to talk. Doesn't make a bit of sense, right? If it doesn't make sense, it probably doesn't make sense. The dark side of technology is in full display. The tools that made the internet global also removed the old logistical barriers that once limited this abuse to certain places. The fight against it now focuses on online safety, detection technologies, coordinating policing, and prevention education rather than only chasing physical studios. So yeah, they spread it all over the world, kind of harder to do, right? So yeah, and it comes directly starting in 1994 in that exact same region: Russia, Ukraine, Baltics, Romania, and Moldavia. So what kicked off some of this was this thing called Operation Cathedral, undercovers the Global Wonderland Club. And that club, I covered that one years ago. I can still remember how revolting that club was. It was a big club, and they were trading abuse images online. I have them all down below if you want to research further, but I need to keep moving along here. So much crime, so little time. So yeah, so the timeline certainly shows a pattern, right? Because 2017 to 2019, rapid spread of smartphones, easy-to-use messaging, and video apps makes almost any child a potential victim. So, yeah, 2020, they start reporting CSAM is now self-produced by minors. I had just the hardest time accepting that, but then once I went through the timeline, it made a lot of sense. Because this is how I think it happened, because they say it happened just a few years ago, right? So in December 2020, that was when the New York Times did the expose on Pornhub. And that was when, and this is an interesting thing too, Pornhub's owner at the time, they've all changed names, and I'm not going to get into all that right now, but anyways, their owner at the time was called MindGeek. And at the time, I think they're out of Canada, but I think they were also out of Israel, but I'm just going off the top of my head here. But anyway, so here's where it really got shaky. First, the New York Times exposed the Pornhub, right? They all work together, right? So then Visa and MasterCard suspend the payments to the site. Oh, wait a minute, something bad's going on here? We had no idea. And then the curious thing happened is this, which I believe that makes all of these things still in circulation, because they never give up an opportunity to make money, right? So what happened when they got caught by the New York Times and the credit card companies suspended their payments, what they did was they removed millions of unverified videos. And yeah, and so then that was a turning point for holding. So yeah, so that was a turning point. And so what I wanted to know out of that, which I really never could figure out, was, well, they went in, they said, oh, we're done. And that was when Bill Ackman and that Lila woman got involved, right? Yelling, Pornhub so bad, Pornhub so bad. Well, what did they do with those millions of images? What happened to them? What happened to them? Nobody knows, right? So they admit, they go in, they remove all of those millions of child images on their own servers. So where'd they go? Obviously, they went somewhere, right? So was that the first big unleashing of this thing? Well, the timeline sort of shows it, right? So yeah, so this essentially opens it up so no single country or region dominates new cases. So yeah, spread it all over the world so nobody can figure this out, right? So, and there's no public country list. They say that victim privacy and safety, revealing countries or worse towns, could endanger children or lead to harassment. Agencies can't share specific victim locations while cases are open. Well, that makes sense, but putting it all under non-disclosures and stuff kind of makes it a little bit shaky, right? So anyway, so the kids in bedroom pattern is indeed global. Most of the bedroom imagery is exactly that: a child in their own bedroom or bathroom using a phone or a webcam after being groomed or coerced online. And they claim that there's no credible evidence has emerged of large buildings of children being staged to look like private bedrooms. Well, I'm the only one that's saying this, so I'm okay. I'll die on this hill. As a matter of fact, I am so convinced that this is what's going on. This is a hill I will die on. I've only got a few hills I'm going to die on, and this is one of them. Because just because no one is saying they're not being done in large buildings doesn't mean it's not happening, right? You think they're going to be telling on themselves? I swear it's true. If I could get out of this house and walk again and not have lung cancer and everything else, I would be on a plane to Romania. I would hunt those buildings down. I don't think it would be that difficult. So then they claim from studio lighting to casual webcam makes the material look very different from older cases. Because offenders sometimes direct victims, telling them how to pose, what to do. It can feel as if there must be someone on the other side of the camera controlling them in the person. But often it's online coercion. No, they're trying to sell it as online coercion completely. I think it's also in-person coercion, right? And that is why I have this idea about these buildings. So they say it does not appear, based on current evidence, to be the result of a hidden industry staging fake bedrooms like I come up with within these buildings. So because they say the early organized and production era in parts of Eastern Europe, well, that gives me more evidence, right? The shift to generate self-generated material by minors under online coercion. The first major enforcement and policy milestone was Pornhub in 2020, and absolutely nothing happened to them. They had millions of pictures. What happened to those pictures? So yeah, I have lots of reasons to be suspicious. I can think of actually billions and maybe trillions of reasons to be suspicious, right? So I looked into that Pornhub disappearance stuff, right? For December 2020, New York Times op-ed by Nicholas Kristof exposes the presence of child sex abuse materials, or CSAM, and non-consensual content on Pornhub. And that was the 4th of December. On the 10th of December, Visa and MasterCard suspend payment services for Pornhub. On the 13th of December 2020, Pornhub's parent company at the time was called MindGeek. They removed millions of unverified videos and required identity verified uploaders going forward. So, yeah, they said this event becomes a policy milestone for holding user-generated platforms accountable for screening and reporting illegal content. No, I consider it a big red flag, right? First of all, where'd those millions of things, millions of videos disappear to, right? How come nobody at Pornhub is in trouble right now? I mean, it has not been resolved, but they always use this thing and say, yeah, well, yeah, because of that, now everything's going great. So basically, 1900s, 1990s to 2000, Eastern Europe were producing it. What more can I say, right? So they call them unique domains hostings. Number 1, United States, 1,914 have been identified. Russian Federation, 1,492 have been identified. Netherlands, 954 have been identified. Those are the places that are broadcasting this horror. Hong Kong, 311 have been identified. France, 171. Germany, 164. Japan, 160. Ukraine, 124. Bulgaria, 102. And Romania, 74. So you can tell that obviously Russia has some pretty good internet connections, right? Good old Russia, right? Over there where those Romanovs were. Yeah, Russia's still in the picture, right? No matter what they want to say about Russia, it's an old, tired trick. So the hosting location refers to where the servers are that store or distribute the illegal material. Those servers often end up in countries that have large amounts of cheap housing capacity, fast networks, and sometimes gaps in monitoring. That's why the Netherlands, the USA, Russia, and a few other European hubs often appear high on hosting lists. Filming and production location refers to where the abuse actually occurs. That is, where the children are harmed and the material is created. So they are all saying that as of the last 3 years, the CSAM is the #1 way to go. Yeah, and it seems pretty clear to me who's running it, right? It doesn't seem like a mystery to me. You had Pornhub unleashing all those millions and millions of content. Geez, imagine the money they made off of that once they released all that stuff. All they would have had to have done is this. They really would have just taken it off the Pornhub server and passed it over to servers over in the Netherlands or the United States, right? I mean, Pornhub, I first started tracking them when I found them. They were first in the Netherlands. I think there's corporate offices that are still there, but they were first in the Netherlands. And that's how I got going in that whole crime. They were hiding all that money because I was only looking at Pornhub, and I found them in the Netherlands, and then I found they had their money in the Luxembourg, and then holy moly, all the rest came open. So yeah, they say that these tip lines now receive 36 million reports a year. The majority are now related to self-produced child sex abuse. So Europol and Interpol emphasize that abuse often starts in mainstream platforms, social media, messaging apps, gaming, rather than on dedicated adult sites. Yeah, because they got that encryption, right? So they're saying now they're going to pass tightening age verification. None of this stuff matters because it's the end-to-end encryption that's doing it all, right? That's the thing that's moving it all. And what I found curious about this Pornhub thing, because I was curious, I'm still curious, the mass removal in December 2020 was not ordered by a court or law enforcement agency. It was a business and reputational response to an external shock. After the New York Times investigation of December 2020 exposed that some videos on Pornhub showed CSAM and other non-consensual material, there was a public outcry. Within days, they suspended their payments. This meant the platform could not process credit card payments for ads or its premium subscribers, a direct threat to its revenue. To try to restore payment processor trust and reduce legal exposure, Pornhub deleted all of the content that had not come from verified contributors. That wiped out millions of older videos overnight. So yes, it was not from a judge, not from a court, and nobody had seemed to mention this, right? So, anyhow, so yeah, they just go in and wipe out all this stuff. I think I'm about ready to wrap up here. I need to wrap up here. So anyway, so whatever they say about their plans moving forward, I also will publish their plans moving forward over on my website. I'm not trying to hide what their plans are either way. They say a lot of things, right? They say a lot of things, and a lot of things get missed. I actually missed the data dump from Pornhub when I was looking into them a long time ago. So yeah, the article was called "The Children of Pornhub: Documented Cases Where CSAM Was Going On in Pornhub," and poof, they got rid of all that data. Isn't that interesting? And I don't know about Pornhub. I kind of lost the track of them when I did that last show about all the money they're moving around. So I don't know what Pornhub is up to right now, to tell you the truth. I really don't know. But deleting huge amounts of data could destroy evidence. So yeah. So they claim that taking the material offline was seen as urgent to stop ongoing distribution and re-victimization. No, they could have put it aside in a special file so that down the road they could make it available for the court system. But that was not their intent, right? The balance between takedown and forensic preservation remains an area of active policy debate. Yeah, don't let the criminals take down their stuff, right? So yeah, you bring in Bill Ackman and the gang. I call that Lila woman the blonde bimbo. So yeah, they can say whatever they want to do. The removal was not ordered by any individual financier or activist, but was a corporate survival decision by MindGeek. They did it all on their own. So yeah, where are all those pictures? Where are they all? Where are all those videos? Still profiting off the backs of children, I see. Hold on a second here. And they also make this bold statement. Current CSAM growth is driven by online coercion of minors using their own devices. It is not tied to any one country or region. I beg to differ. According to me, now remember, just according to me, I'm just one person saying this, but you have to evaluate these things for yourself. Doesn't this thing kind of reek to high heaven? It just seems like something is pretty fishy in this whole deal here. All these agencies in there that obviously, I mean, John Walsh, would you trust that guy? America's Most Wanted. They always put themselves in those positions of authority. Yeah, my kid's head was chopped off and left in a canal. Feel sorry for me. Don't question me. Listen, my kid Adam, he had his head chopped off. How could you argue with me? So yeah. So that's exactly how this whole thing is happening. And they're claiming that the majority of cases now involve individual offenders or small peer-to-peer groups, not a top-down network. I beg to differ, because contact with minors happens through social media, gaming chats, and message apps, often by strangers who pretend to be another teen or a friendly adult. And they have no evidence, none. Law enforcement investigations and international threat assessments have not uncovered any centralized business or state-like structure sending people to groom children. So my idea has been totally denied by all of them, okay? So who are you going to believe? Me or these people? Let me see. Closed offender communities. There are online forums and encrypted chat groups where offenders exchange material and sometimes coach each other. These groups are often infiltrated and taken down by police. They're called Operation Rescue. Anyway, so they say the police have exposed criminal rings in parts of Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe that arranged live-streamed abuse for paying customers. Yeah, well, and they say no credible evidence has surfaced of a single global agency or network deploying recruiters to produce CSAM at scale. So, according to them, my theory is a really bad one, and they're saying none of this is happening. None of it. Just look the other way. Remember that I did that show about snuff films not that long ago. That guy from Scotland Yard sat there and said, no law enforcement has ever seen a snuff film. These people are psychopaths. They're skilled liars. That's why they put on those uniforms, right? They put on those uniforms and those medals, and that was the first way they tricked all of us, right? Oh, we should listen to these people. They got those medals on them, right? Even though they're demons, right, hiding behind those medals. So yeah, I'm going to scroll down here real quick, but I think I got this about wrapped up here. So in wrapping this up, there is no evidence of a hidden global studio-based snuff or CSAM industry operating today. Nothing like I described going on in Romania is operating today, according to them. The bulk of new material is coming from online exploitation of minors on their own devices. So, yeah, I think it's all just something that they have cooked up and they're hiding it. So they say law enforcement and child protection groups do try to identify where victims are located by country and region, but they rarely publish a full, reliable list because of privacy, legal, and investigative constraints. What is available comes from aggregated reports, case studies, and disclosures in major investigations. So yeah, it becomes a very, very circular thing, right? Because of privacy and security, and then you got kids involved and all that, so they can say, well, they say that child victims are located worldwide in developed and developing countries alike. Some public signals suggest higher volumes of reported cases come from countries with greater internet penetration, so more exposure, and stronger reporting infrastructure. So I think there's billions and billions of dollars involved here, and if you could get a kid in front of a camera, you get 20 kids, you get 50 kids in a building, you got tons and tons of money, and it's all because the root cause of all of this, in my opinion, just my opinion, I don't think you'll find many people bringing this up, is the end-to-end encryption. That means WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, Instagram DMs, the iMessage on Apple. Yes, all of those places are part of the deal. So Snapchat doesn't have fully encryption, but yeah, it's still available. Instagram, Facebook Messenger, and WhatsApp, all of them offer the vanish mode, or disappearing messages. That's very convenient, right? Telegram, they have secret chats can be set to auto-delete. Signal also supports disappearing messages. So yeah, end-to-end encryption and disappearing messages make it harder for platforms to scan content proactively. Well, I think that's kind of the point of the system here, if you ask me. Thanks to the heroes at Silicon Valley, you know, the eugenist people over there. So, yeah. So I don't think there's much more going on here that I have to say on this thing. The story of online child abuse is no longer about a few hidden studios in far-up places. It's about the way ordinary technology, the same phones and apps we use every day, have become tools for predators. Gee, what a coincidence, right? The crime has shifted from dark back rooms to the privacy spaces of children's homes, and also, I would argue, big buildings. And that reality forces a change in how society responds. The challenge now is not only to pursue the offenders, but also to reach the children before harm is done. Reach those children before they get harmed. That's probably the best we can ever do right now. I think it's two things. Some of the actual children in their bedrooms, and some of the children are in big buildings. Of course, they all say that my theory is wrong and their theory is right. So who are you going to believe? Be safe out there.